My mother separated my twin sons at birth and spent 17 years making sure I never knew one of them existed. She handed me the better baby like a gift and left his brother 4 miles away to grow up thinking I abandoned him. I raised one son in a penthouse, while Marcus taught himself to survive in a one-bedroom apartment, and neither of them knew they were twins. The DNA test that would have exposed her? She stole it from my mail and deleted the results before I could see them. For 17 years, she's been sitting at my Sunday dinner table, watching me be half a father, and she never said a word. The moment I discovered what she'd done, I had to decide: protect the family she built on lies, or tell my sons the truth that would shatter them both. My son's academic ceremony started at 7. I arrived at 6:30, claiming a front row seat the way I claimed conference rooms: early, assertive, unapologetic. The other fathers arrived in khakis and loosened ties, fresh from offices where they moved paper and answered emails. I arrived in a Tom Ford suit worth more than most of their monthly salaries, fresh from a merger negotiation that would reshape the pharmaceutical industry. At 42, I'd built an empire that would have made my father jealous, but none of that mattered when I sat in that auditorium chair. Because here, surrounded by proud parents, clutching programs and wiping proud tears, I wasn't James Birch, billionaire CEO. I was just a father. And I was certain, absolutely certain, that I had done this one thing right. Now, pay close attention to what happens next, because this certainty, this pride I felt sitting in that auditorium, would be completely shattered within 3 weeks. And the person who destroyed it? Someone I trusted more than anyone else in the world. The stage lights dimmed. The principal began calling names. Parents around me whispered and pointed at phones, capturing moments they'd replay at Thanksgiving dinners for decades. When they called my son's name, I stood. Not because protocol required it, because pride demanded it. He crossed that stage with his shoulders back and his head high, accepting his award with the kind of confidence I'd spent 17 years cultivating in him. The applause felt like vindication. I had failed at marriage. My ex-wife made that clear during our divorce proceedings, listing my emotional unavailability in alphabetical order through her attorney. I had failed at work-life balance. My assistant scheduled my son's events the way she scheduled board meetings with reminders, contingency plans, and backup transportation. But I had not failed at fatherhood. I showed up. I canceled the Tokyo deal to coach Little League. I restructured a $14 million acquisition so I wouldn't miss his 8th grade graduation. Other men built empires and forgot their children's names. I built an empire and remembered. That distinction mattered to me more than stock prices ever could. But here's what you need to understand, and this is the part that haunts me now. I thought showing up was enough. I thought presence equaled success. I had no idea that the very foundation of my fatherhood was built on someone else's lie. After the ceremony, my son found me in the lobby, certificate clutched in both hands like it was breakable. "You came," he said, and something in his voice made my chest tighten. "Of course I came. Mom said you'd probably have to work." I made a mental note to have another conversation with my ex-wife about undermining my presence in our son's life. "I'll always show up for you," I told him, resting my hand on his shoulder. "Always." He smiled the crooked, hesitant smile that reminded me of myself at 17. And I believed, with everything in me, that I had given him something my own father never gave me. Consistency. Presence. Proof that he mattered more than profits. Remember this moment. This is the last time I would feel certain about anything in my life. Because what was waiting for me, what I didn't know yet, would turn every memory I cherished into evidence of a crime I didn't commit but benefited from anyway. We went to dinner that night, just the two of us at the steakhouse he'd been requesting since his 14th birthday. He ordered the ribeye without looking at the price. I let him. "Dad," he said halfway through his meal, cutting his steak with the precision I'd taught him, "do you ever regret it? Choosing me over, work stuff?" "Andrew." I said his name like it was an answer in itself. "Never. Not once. But you could have made more money, built more companies." "I built something better," I said. "I built you." His face flushed the way it did when emotions got too big for his 17-year-old body to contain. "Thanks, Dad." 2 words. But they landed heavier than any contract I'd ever signed. Can you imagine believing you've done everything right, only to discover later that your entire life was orchestrated by someone else? Keep that feeling in mind, because it gets so much worse. Driving home that night, I felt something I rarely allowed myself to feel. Satisfaction. Not the hollow kind that comes from watching stock portfolios grow. The real kind. The kind that sits warm in your chest and whispers that maybe, despite the divorce, despite the 80-hour work weeks, despite the ways I'd failed at being human, I had succeeded at being his father. My mother called as I pulled into my building's garage. Virginia. Elegant, controlled, the kind of woman who wore pearls to breakfast and used words like decorum without irony. "How was the ceremony?" she asked, her voice smooth and familiar. "Perfect. He won the mathematics award." "Of course he did." "He's a Birch." Pride threaded through her voice, the same pride that had defined my childhood. Birch men achieved. Birch men excelled. Birch men did not settle for ordinary. "You raised him well, James," she continued. "Despite everything." Despite the divorce, she meant, despite raising him largely without a conventional family structure. "I did my best," I said. "Your best has always been extraordinary." The compliment should have felt good. Instead, it felt rehearsed, calculated, like everything Virginia said. But what she'd actually done, what I didn't know yet, was far more calculated than I could have imagined. And that calculation would cost me 17 years I could never get back. But I dismissed the thought as quickly as it came, because my mother had been my anchor through the chaos of my divorce, the logistics of single fatherhood, the exhaustion of building an empire while raising a child. She'd been there for every school event I'd missed, every parent-teacher conference I'd had to reschedule. Every moment when I'd failed, she'd filled the gap. "Thank you, Mother," I said. "Because that's what you said to the woman who held your life together when it threatened to unravel. Get some rest, darling. You sound exhausted." I was. Bone deep, soul tired, exhausted. But it was the good kind of tired. The kind that comes from showing up. I ended the call, parked, and rode the elevator to my penthouse, replaying my son's smile, his awkward gratitude, the way he'd said, "Thanks, Dad," like it was a confession. I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey I didn't drink and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I'd conquered. Somewhere out there, men were closing deals. Somewhere out there, empires were rising and falling. But here, 43 floors above the noise, I was just a father who'd done one thing right. Or so I believed. I didn't know yet that everything I thought I knew was built on a lie. I didn't know that the woman I trusted most had stolen something irreplaceable from me. I didn't know that across town, another 17-year-old boy, a boy with my eyes, my temper, my stubborn jawline, was going to bed in a neighborhood I'd never visited, wondering why his father had never come looking for him. I didn't know any of it yet. All I knew was that I loved my son, and that love felt real, solid, unshakable. It would be 3 weeks before a single phone call proved me wrong. And when that moment came, everything I believed about family, about trust, about the people we build our lives around, all of it, would collapse. You know, we spend our lives trusting the people closest to us, parents, family, the ones who claim they're protecting us. And sometimes that trust is the most dangerous thing we carry. If this story is already making you think about the secrets that shape families, the truths we never question until it's too late, then you're exactly where you need to be. Hit subscribe, because what happens next will change how you see loyalty, love, and the lies we tell ourselves about the people who raised us. 3 weeks later, my son collapsed during soccer practice. The call came at 2:14 on a Tuesday afternoon, mid-presentation to a room full of investors who'd flown in from Singapore. "Mr. Birch, this is Coach Henderson. Your son, he's conscious, but we're taking him to Mercy General as a precaution. He passed out during drills." I was in my car before the coach finished explaining about dehydration protocols and liability waivers. Investors could wait. Mergers could wait. Singapore could burn to the ground for all I cared. My son was in an ambulance. And here's where everything started to unravel. One routine hospital visit, one simple blood test, one question I never saw coming. Pay attention to what the doctor says next, because this single moment will destroy 17 years of certainty. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear, that particular combination that makes even billionaires feel powerless. I found him in an examination room, sitting upright on a paper-covered table, looking embarrassed rather than ill. "Dad, I'm fine." Coach overreacted. But his color was wrong. gray undertones beneath skin that should have been flushed from practice. Let the doctors decide that, I said, keeping my voice level even as my heart hammered against my ribs. The physician on call was young, too young. I thought initially, with the kind of composed efficiency that came from residency training at institutions that didn't tolerate incompetence. Dr. Marcus Chen. His badge identified him as Internal Medicine, Mercy General's Teaching Hospital Division. Mr. Birch, he said, extending his hand. Your son's vitals are stable now. We'd like to run some routine blood work, just to rule out anemia, electrolyte imbalances, anything that might explain the syncope. Syncope, medical terminology for fainting, as if clinical language made collapse less terrifying. Do whatever you need to do, I said. My son rolled his eyes. It's not a big deal, Dad. But 17-year-olds think they're immortal. Fathers know better. The blood draw took less than 5 minutes. A phlebotomist in cartoon-printed scrubs, a handful of vials with color-coded caps, a cotton ball taped to the inside of my son's elbow. Results should be ready within a few hours, Dr. Chen said. We'll keep him for observation until then. You're welcome to wait here, or we can call you. I stayed. Of course, I stayed. I sent an email to my assistant canceling the rest of my day, ordered takeout from the cafeteria that neither of us ate, and watched my son scroll through his phone with the bored resignation of a teenager trapped in a hospital room. But something was wrong. I could feel it in the air, in the way the nurses kept glancing at us, in the weight of waiting that felt heavier than it should have been for routine blood work. What I didn't know yet was that somewhere in that lab, numbers were appearing on a screen that didn't make sense, and those numbers were about to ask me a question I'd never thought to answer. At 6:47, Dr. Chen returned. Something in his posture had changed. The easy competence from earlier had been replaced by something more careful, more hesitant. He glanced at my son, then back at me. Mr. Birch, could I speak with you privately for a moment? My stomach dropped. Is something wrong? Is he? Your son is fine, Dr. Chen said quickly. The blood work shows no concerning abnormalities. Mild dehydration, slightly low iron. Nothing that requires immediate intervention. Relief should have flooded through me. It didn't. Because doctors didn't ask for private conversations to deliver good news. Then what is it? I asked. Dr. Chen shifted his weight, cleared his throat, chose his words with the precision of someone navigating a minefield. Mr. Birch, this is delicate. And I want to preface this by saying that I'm not making any accusations or drawing any conclusions. I'm simply obligated to mention something that appeared in the blood work analysis. The air in the hallway felt too thick to breathe. What appeared? I said. Dr. Chen's jaw tightened. Your son's blood type is AB negative. It's rare, less than 1% of the population carries it. Now, blood typing isn't typically part of routine analysis, but in cases of potential transfusion needs, we run a preliminary screen. I waited. He continued, his voice dropping lower. AB negative can only occur when one parent has A or AB blood, and the other has B or AB blood. It's basic Mendelian genetics. I'm aware of genetics, I said, though my pulse had begun to race for reasons I didn't yet understand. Dr. Chen met my eyes. Mr. Birch, are you certain you're biologically related to your son? The question landed like a physical blow. For a moment, just a moment, the hospital corridor tilted. This is the moment everything changes. The moment when truth stops feeling safe and starts feeling like a weapon pointed directly at your chest. Can you imagine standing in a hospital hallway, realizing that the one thing you were certain about, the one relationship you built your entire identity around, might be a lie? Then reality reasserted itself, sharp and indignant. Are you seriously asking me that? My voice came out harder than intended. I've raised that boy for 17 years. I was there when he was born. I've been to every milestone, I'm not questioning your role as his father, Dr. Chen interrupted gently. I'm asking about biological paternity, because unless there's information I'm missing about your blood type or his mother's, the genetic inheritance here doesn't align. I stared at him, 17 years of certainty colliding with a question I'd never thought to ask. What's my blood type? I said finally. According to your medical records, on file here from your physical last year, type O positive. And his mother? I don't have access to her records, but if you know her blood type, type O, I said automatically. She told me once, years ago, during a blood drive. Dr. Chen's expression shifted into something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Mr. Birch, 2O-type parents cannot produce an AB-negative child. It's genetically impossible. The A and B antigens have to come from somewhere. The words made sense individually. Together, they formed a sentence my brain refused to process. There must be a mistake, I said. Lab error. Sample contamination. Something. It's possible, Dr. Chen said carefully. That's why I'm bringing this to your attention, rather than jumping to conclusions. But our lab follows strict protocols. Contamination is extremely unlikely. The fluorescent lights above us buzzed softly, filling the silence that stretched between doctor and patient, between truth and denial. And here's what nobody tells you about moments like this, the moment when your entire life gets called into question. You don't scream. You don't collapse. You just stand there while your brain tries to reorganize 17 years of memory into something that makes sense. Except nothing makes sense anymore. What are you suggesting I do? I asked. Dr. Chen's shoulders dropped slightly. That's entirely your decision, Mr. Birch. If you want certainty, a paternity test would provide definitive answers. But I want to be clear, I'm not telling you what to think or feel about this. I'm simply presenting information that emerged during routine care. My hands felt numb. My throat felt tight. If I wanted to order a test, I heard myself say, how would that work? There are private labs that specialize in paternity testing. Discreet, confidential. You'd submit samples, typically cheek swabs, and receive results within a few days to 2 weeks. Some labs offer expedited processing. A few days. 72 hours to confirm or destroy 17 years of certainty. Thank you, I said, though I wasn't sure what I was thanking him for. Dr. Chen nodded. Your son is cleared to go home. Follow up with his regular physician about the iron levels, encourage hydration, and watch for any recurring episodes. But medically speaking, he's fine. Medically speaking. As if medicine was the only thing that mattered. I walked back into the examination room, where my son sat playing a game on his phone, completely unaware that his entire existence had just been called into question. We're good to go? He asked, looking up. We're good to go, I echoed, forcing normalcy into my voice. The drive home was quiet. He dozed in the passenger seat, exhausted from the day's drama, while I gripped the steering wheel and tried to organize thoughts that refused to line up properly. 2O-type parents cannot produce an AB-negative child. The sentence repeated in my mind like a glitch in code. Each repetition stripping away another layer of certainty I'd built my identity upon. What happens when the science doesn't lie but your life does? When genetics tells you one truth and 17 years of memory tells you another? Keep watching, because the answer is worse than you think. I dropped him at his mother's house, his week with her, and watched him walk inside with his soccer bag slung over one shoulder, completely unaware that his father's world was unraveling. Back in my penthouse, I stood at the same window where 3 weeks ago I'd felt satisfaction. Now I felt nothing but dread. I pulled out my phone and searched. Private paternity testing near me. Dozens of results appeared. Clinical websites with stock photos of smiling families and taglines promising confidential results in 3 to 5 business days. I selected the most reputable lab I could find, the one affiliated with a university medical center, and filled out the online intake form. No lawyers. No PR team. No assistants. Just me, alone at midnight, submitting DNA samples and praying the results would prove Dr. Chen wrong. What I didn't know was that my email account had been forwarding copies to Virginia for years, a helpful security feature she'd set up during my divorce, so important messages wouldn't get missed. She'd been reading my emails long before I ordered that test. The confirmation email arrived 3 minutes later. Thank you for choosing ClearPath Diagnostics. Your test kit will arrive within 2 business days. Once samples are returned to our lab, expect results within 10 to 14 business days. 2 weeks. 14 days to live in the space between certainty and catastrophe. I poured myself whiskey, actually drank it this time, and watched the city lights blur against the glass. Truth had always felt safe to me. Numbers didn't lie. Data didn't deceive. But sitting there, waiting for a test that could rewrite my entire history, I realized something I'd never understood before. Truth only feels safe when you're certain you know what it is. The moment truth hesitates, the moment it looks you in the eye and asks, "Are you sure?" it becomes the most terrifying thing in the world. and I wasn't sure anymore. Not about blood types or genetics or 17 years of memory. I wasn't sure about anything except this. In 2 weeks, an envelope would arrive, and nothing would ever be the same. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have predicted, was that the envelope would never reach me, because someone else had already decided what truth I was allowed to know. And that person? I trusted her my entire life. The test kit arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a plain white box with no company logo discretion, as promised. I opened it alone in my home office. 2 sterile swab sets, instruction cards, printed in clinical sans serif font, prepaid return packaging. Simple. Antiseptic. Impersonal. I collected my sample first, rubbing the cotton swab against the inside of my cheek for 30 seconds as instructed, sealing it in the labeled vial with hands that refused to stay steady. Getting my son's sample required more creativity. I told him the fainting episode had flagged a potential genetic marker the doctor wanted to retest. Not a lie. Exactly. Just truth bent into a shape that wouldn't shatter him. He rolled his eyes, but opened his mouth. 30 seconds. 1 vial. Sealed and labeled. I shipped the package that same evening from a FedEx location 20 minutes outside my usual radius, because even paranoia felt justified now. The tracking confirmation arrived at 9:42 p.m. Estimated delivery to lab, October 18th. Results expected, October 28th, November 1st. 12 days. I marked the calendar on my phone with a vague notation that wouldn't mean anything to anyone scrolling through my schedule. Follow-up, personal. Then, I waited. Here's what nobody tells you about waiting for news that could destroy your life. Every day feels like drowning in slow motion. You go through the motions, meetings, emails, conversations, but you're not really there. You're just counting down to the moment when everything you believed gets confirmed or obliterated. Waiting, I discovered, is its own particular form of torture when you're a man accustomed to controlling outcomes. I could force markets to bend. I could restructure entire corporations with a single phone call. But I couldn't make a laboratory process DNA any faster than chemistry allowed. The first few days passed in a haze of manufactured normalcy. Board meetings, conference calls. A gala I attended because my absence would have generated questions. I smiled at the right moments, laughed at jokes I didn't hear, signed documents I barely read. And every night, I checked my phone for tracking updates, watching the small package move through processing centers and logistics hubs, like it carried something ordinary, instead of the potential destruction of everything I believed about my life. October 23rd arrived. 5 days before results were scheduled. That's when Virginia showed up. I was working from home that afternoon, rare for me. But I'd been avoiding the office lately, unable to tolerate the questions in my assistant's eyes when I zoned out during briefings. The doorman called at 3:15. "Mr. Birch, your mother is here to see you. Should I send her up?" I almost said no. Something in my gut tensed, though I couldn't name why. But you don't turn away Virginia Birch without an explanation that would require conversations I wasn't ready to have. "Send her up," I said. "Now watch what happens next." Because this moment, this perfectly timed visit from the one person I trusted most, this is where manipulation looks like love. This is where control disguises itself as care. She arrived 7 minutes later, carrying a covered dish that smelled like the chicken soup she'd made throughout my childhood, the kind with hand-cut vegetables and herbs from her garden, the kind that took 4 hours to simmer properly. "You look exhausted, James," she said, sweeping into my penthouse, with the elegant authority of a woman who'd never been denied entry anywhere. She wore a cream cashmere sweater and pearls. Always pearls. "I'm fine, Mother." "You're not fine. You've lost weight. When did you last have a proper meal?" She moved into my kitchen without waiting for permission, locating bowls and spoons with the muscle memory of someone who'd set up this space when I first purchased the property. "I heard about the incident with your son," she continued, ladling soup with practiced precision. "Fainting at soccer practice, the hospital visit. Why didn't you call me?" "It wasn't serious. Low iron, dehydration." Still, she set a bowl in front of me, steam rising in delicate curls. "You shouldn't have to handle these things alone." The soup was perfect, as always. I ate because refusing would have required energy I didn't have. Virginia sat across from me, her hands folded on my granite countertop, watching me with the kind of maternal concern that should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt suffocating. "You're working too hard again," she said softly. "I can see it in your eyes. That same haunted look you had during the divorce." I said I'm fine. "And I'm saying you're not." She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. Her skin was cool, her rings pressing against my knuckles. "Talk to me, darling. What's really going on?" For one unguarded moment, I almost told her. Almost confessed about the doctor's question, the impossible blood type, the DNA test currently being processed in a laboratory 3 states away. But something stopped me. Some instinct I couldn't name. Some small voice in the back of my mind whispering, "Don't tell her. Not this. Not yet." "Just tired," I said instead. "Big acquisition closing next week." She studied me for a long moment. Her pale blue eyes searching my face the way they had throughout my childhood whenever she suspected I was hiding something. Then she smiled small, knowing, maternal. "You've always carried too much, James, just like your father." She stayed for 2 hours, tidying my kitchen, organizing my refrigerator, sitting in my living room with Earl Grey tea, asking about my son's college applications and whether I'd considered the yacht club fundraiser next month. Normal conversation, comfortable rhythms. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was looking for something. Her gaze kept drifting to my home office door, to the mail stacked on my entryway table, to my phone when it buzzed with notifications I ignored. And here's where it gets important. Sometimes the people who hurt us most don't look like villains. They look like concerned mothers bringing soup. They look like love. They sound like protection. But underneath that, care is control, so complete you don't even see the cage until the door locks behind you. "I should let you get back to work," she said finally. Standing with the graceful posture that finishing school had drilled into her 60 years ago. She hugged me at the door longer than usual, her Chanel No. 5 perfume wrapping around me like nostalgia weaponized. "I love you, darling," she whispered against my shoulder. "You know that, don't you? Everything I've ever done has been because I love you." Strange thing to say. Strange emphasis. But I was too tired to analyze it. "I know, Mother." She left, and the penthouse felt larger in her absence, quieter. I returned to my office, dove back into work, and tried to forget the odd tension that had threaded through the entire visit. The days continued passing. October 28th arrived. According to ClearPath Diagnostics' timeline, results should have been finalized. I checked my email every 30 minutes. Nothing. October 29th. Still nothing. October 30th. My phone remained silent except for work calls I barely answered. By November 1st, the absolute latest end of their promised window, I was checking my mailbox twice daily, my email inbox every 15 minutes, my phone for missed calls every time I looked away for more than 60 seconds. Nothing arrived. And this is where you need to pay attention. Because when truth goes missing, when results that should exist suddenly don't, that's not an accident, that's intention. That's someone deciding what you're allowed to know. On November 2nd, I called the lab directly. The customer service representative sounded professionally apologetic. "Mr. Birch, I'm showing your samples were received on October 18th as scheduled. Processing typically takes 10 to 14 business days. It's been 15 business days," I interrupted. "Yes, sir. Let me check the status." Keyboard clicks. A pause that stretched too long. "I'm showing your case was flagged for additional verification on October 24th. Sometimes, when results are unexpected, our lab runs secondary confirmation before releasing findings." My stomach dropped. What does unexpected mean? "I'm not privy to the specific results, sir. That information is only available to the primary account holder through our secure portal or certified mail. But the notation indicates results should be released within 48 hours pending final review. So 2 more days." "Yes, sir. You should receive notification by November 4th at the latest." I ended the call and stared at my calendar. November 4th. 3 days away. Should be released. Pending final review. Clinical language that meant my life was being decided by strangers in lab coats who didn't know they were holding a detonator. November 3rd arrived. Then, November 4th. I was in a breakfast meeting with investors when my phone buzzed with an email notification. ClearPath Diagnostics. Subject: test results ready for secure portal access. My vision tunneled. The investor across from me was still talking about market projections and quarterly forecasts, his mouth moving without producing sound I could process. "Excuse me," I said, standing abruptly. "I need to take this." I walked out of the restaurant, onto the street, stood in the November wind, while my hands shook too hard to unlock my phone properly. 3 attempts. 4. Finally, the screen cooperated. I opened my email, clicked the link, entered my password. The portal loaded with agonizing slowness. Test results, available for download. 1 PDF file, 3 pages that would either confirm 17 years of certainty or detonate my entire existence. I was reaching for the download button when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost declined, but something made me answer. "Mr. Birch?" A woman's voice, professionally hesitant. "This is Mercy General Hospital, Medical Records Department. We're calling regarding some missing documentation related to your son's recent visit." "Missing documentation?" "Yes, sir, doctor. Chen requested we send you informational materials about follow-up care and genetic counseling resources. We mailed them to your address on file 3 weeks ago, but they were returned to us yesterday, marked, moved, no forwarding address." I froze. "That's impossible. I haven't moved." The package was sent via certified mail, which requires signature confirmation. According to postal tracking, it was signed for on October 24th at 3:47 p.m. October 24th, the day Virginia visited. The day she stayed for 2 hours, tidying and organizing, her gaze drifting toward my mail. "Who signed for it?" I asked, though ice was already spreading through my chest. "The signature is, let me see, V. Birch." The street tilted. V. Birch. Virginia Birch. My mother had signed for mail addressed to me. Mail about genetic counseling. And then marked it returned. And right here, right now, is when you realize that betrayal doesn't always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it signs your name. Sometimes it intercepts your truth. Sometimes it wears pearls and brings you soup while dismantling your entire reality behind your back. "Mr. Birch? Are you still there? What address did you have on file?" I said quietly. She read it back. "My penthouse, correct down to the unit number." "And this package, what did it contain?" "According to our records, informational brochures about inheritance patterns and a copy of your son's blood work results showing the AB negative typing that triggered Dr. Chen's inquiry. My mother had intercepted medical documentation, had signed my name or close enough, had made it disappear." "Thank you," I heard myself say. "I'll handle this." I ended the call. Stood there on the sidewalk, while pedestrians flowed around me like water around stone. Then I opened my email again, refreshed the page. The ClearPath Diagnostics portal was blank. Error 404, results not found. I refreshed again. Same error. I called the lab. "Mr. Birch, I'm showing your results were accessed from your account at 11:52 a.m. this morning, and subsequently deleted by the account holder." "I didn't delete anything. The action originated from your login credentials, sir." I checked my email, scrolled back. There, buried among promotional emails and newsletters I never read, was a ClearPath notification from 3 weeks ago. Security alert. Password reset requested from new device. October 24th, 3:47 p.m. The same day, the same time. She'd been in my home, in my office. She'd accessed my email while I was in the kitchen eating soup she'd made to keep me distracted. She'd reset my password, accessed the portal, and when results were posted this morning, she deleted them before I could see what they said. Someone I trusted had stood between me and the truth. And that someone was my mother. I called her cell phone. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail, her elegant recorded voice instructing me to leave a message. "Mother," I said, my voice shaking with something I couldn't name. "We need to talk. Today. Now." I ended the call, tried again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. She was avoiding me, which meant she knew exactly what she'd done. And why. I stood there on the sidewalk, holding a phone that had become a weapon, staring at a portal that should have contained truth, but held only deliberate absence. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. Whatever those DNA results said, whatever truth they contained, it was bad enough that my mother had committed fraud, violated my privacy, and destroyed evidence to keep me from knowing it. which meant the answer to Dr. Chen's question wasn't just uncomfortable. It was catastrophic. And the woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me about integrity and honor, who'd sat at my table every Sunday for 17 years. She'd been the architect of the lie all along. I found her at the country club. Of course, I found her at the country club. Virginia Birch took afternoon tea there every Thursday at 4 o'clock, had done so for 30 years. A ritual as immovable as her opinions about proper silverware placement. I walked through the dining room without acknowledging the members who tried to catch my eye, their curiosity poorly disguised behind polite nods and raised champagne flutes. She sat at her usual table by the window overlooking the 18th hole. Bone china teacup raised halfway to her lips, pearls gleaming against her navy dress. She saw me coming, and she didn't flinch. That's what I remember most clearly, her absolute stillness as I crossed the room, my fury barely contained behind a smile I wore for the benefit of 300 witnesses. Watch her face right now. Watch how she doesn't look surprised, doesn't look caught, because she's been preparing for this confrontation for 17 years. She knew this day would come. She just didn't think I'd be strong enough to face her. "James," she said, setting down her teacup with the delicate precision of a woman performing for an audience. "What a lovely surprise. Will you join me?" "We need to talk," I said quietly. "Now." "I'm in the middle of tea, darling. I don't care." Something flickered behind her eyes, calculation, maybe, or recognition that this conversation could no longer be postponed. She dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, placed it beside her plate, and stood with the graceful posture that had defined her entire existence. "The library is private this time of day," she said. I followed her through mahogany-paneled corridors into a room lined with leather-bound books nobody read, closing the door behind us with more force than necessary. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Virginia turned to face me, hands folded at her waist, chin raised slightly, the posture of a woman preparing to defend territory. "You intercepted my mail," I said, my voice shaking despite my attempt at control. "You accessed my email. You deleted DNA test results before I could see them." I expected denial, gasping shock, maternal outrage at being accused. Instead, Virginia simply looked at me with those pale blue eyes and said, "Yes." The admission landed harder than lies would have. "You're not even going to pretend you didn't do it? What would be the point, James? You already know." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would you do that?" She moved to the window, gazing out at manicured golf greens, with the detached interest of someone discussing weather patterns. "Because some truths are more destructive than protective," she said calmly. "Because that test would have destroyed everything." "Everything you built, you mean?" "Everything we built." She turned to face me. "Your career, your reputation, your relationship with your son. Did you really want to implode all of that over genetic trivia?" "Genetic trivia?" I stared at her. "We're talking about paternity. About whether the boy I've raised for 17 years is actually what?" Virginia interrupted. "Yours? He's been yours in every way that matters. Biology is just data, James. Love is what makes someone a father." "Don't," I said, my voice dropping to something dangerous. "Don't you dare weaponize sentiment to justify what you did." She regarded me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression, a decision being made in real time. "You want the truth?" she asked. "I've wanted the truth since a doctor asked me a question I couldn't answer." Virginia crossed to a leather armchair and sat with the deliberate slowness of someone preparing to deliver testimony. "And here's what you need to understand about people like my mother. They don't see manipulation as cruelty. They see it as management. They don't think they're destroying lives, they think they're designing better futures." Remember this when she starts talking. Every word is calculated. "Do you remember Claire?" she asked. The name hit me like a fist. Claire. The woman I'd loved 18 years ago, before my ex-wife, before empire building consumed my 20s, before I became the version of myself that prioritized board meetings over humanity. Claire, who disappeared after 6 months of the most intense relationship I'd ever experienced. Who stopped returning calls. Who vanished so completely I'd eventually convinced myself she'd been a fever dream. "What does Claire have to do with anything?" I asked, though dread was already coiling in my stomach. "She was pregnant," Virginia said simply. "With your child. Twins, actually." The room tilted. "That's impossible. She She never told you because I made certain she couldn't. Virginia's voice remained steady, clinical. She tried, James. Called the house multiple times. Showed up at your office twice. Even sent letters. I never received any letters. No, Virginia agreed. You didn't. The implication settled over me like ice water. You intercepted everything. I protected you, she corrected. You were 25 years old, on the verge of your first major acquisition. You had investors watching your every move. Board members questioning whether you were mature enough to lead. A pregnant girlfriend with no family money, no social standing, no stability. Her name was Claire. Would have derailed everything you'd worked for. Everything we'd worked for. Virginia leaned forward slightly. So yes, I intervened. I made certain her calls didn't reach you. I ensured her letters never arrived. And when she gave birth, what? My voice had gone dangerously quiet. Virginia met my eyes without flinching. There were 2 babies, James, twin boys. Born 3 minutes apart at Mercy General on February 14th, 17 years ago. The date matched. My son's birthday. Now this is where it gets truly disturbing. Pay close attention to her language. To how she describes what she did like it was a business transaction. Because to her, that's exactly what it was. My children were assets to be allocated. She had complications during delivery, Virginia continued. Emergency cesarean. She was unconscious for several hours. That's when I made arrangements. What kind of arrangements? The practical kind. Virginia's tone suggested she was discussing stock portfolios, not human lives. Claire was unstable postpartum complications. No support system, no financial resources. She could barely care for 1 child, let alone 2. So, I made a decision that benefited everyone involved. You took them, I whispered. You took her children. I redirected 1 child, Virginia corrected. The stronger one. The one who showed immediate developmental markers, suggesting intelligence, adaptability. The one who cried less and responded better to stimuli. I had him placed with you through official channels, adoption paperwork, sealed records, everything legally sound. And the other baby? Remained with Claire. She woke from surgery, believing she'd delivered a single child. The hospital staff were cooperative. A generous donation to their neonatal wing ensured discretion. My legs wouldn't hold me anymore. I sat down hard in the chair opposite my mother, staring at this woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me about integrity and honor, and the Birch family legacy. You separated twins, I said. You stole a child from his mother and gave him to me without my knowledge or consent. I gave you a son, Virginia said firmly. I gave you the opportunity to be a father when you were ready, without the chaos of Claire's instability derailing your trajectory. I gave that boy the one you've loved and raised a life of privilege and opportunity he never would have had otherwise. What about my other son? The words felt foreign in my mouth. What about the child you left with Claire? Something flickered across Virginia's face, not quite guilt, but close. He had his mother. That was more than the other boy had. He didn't have his father. My voice cracked. He didn't have his brother. You separated twins. Do you have any idea what that means? The bond between... I know exactly what it means, Virginia interrupted. It means I made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. It means I chose the better future. Better for who? For you. For your career. For the son you were able to raise without the burden of a woman who would have dragged you down into her chaos. I stared at her. This woman who'd orchestrated 17 years of my life, like a corporate restructuring. Can you imagine sitting across from your own mother and realizing she's a stranger? Realizing that every piece of advice, every intervention, every moment of protection was actually control dressed up as love? What happened to Claire? I asked. Virginia's expression hardened. She moved away, raised her son alone. I made certain she received financial support anonymously, of course. Enough to survive, not enough to trace back to us. Where is she now? I don't know. I stopped tracking her movements 8 years ago, when it became clear she had no intention of disrupting our arrangement. Our arrangement. As if my children were business deals. As if their lives were something to be negotiated and filed away. I want their addresses, I said. Claire's and my other sons. I want them today. James. Today, mother, or I go public with everything you've done. Fraud, document falsification, Whatever legal terminology applies to stealing a child and redistributing him like office supplies. Virginia's composure finally cracked. You wouldn't. The scandal would destroy. I don't care. The words exploded out of me. I don't care about scandal or reputation or the Birch family legacy. I care about my children, both of them. I care about 17 years I lost with a son who thinks I abandoned him. I care about the fact that you played God with human lives and felt entitled to do it. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Virginia reached into her handbag and withdrew a small leather notebook, the kind she used to track social obligations and charity commitments. She wrote something on a page, tore it out, and handed it to me. An address, a name, not Claire's. My son's. He goes by his mother's maiden name, Virginia said quietly. He doesn't know anything about you. Claire never told him. I stared at the paper in my hand. An address in a neighborhood 40 minutes from my penthouse. A name that should have been mine to give him. A life that should have included me from the beginning. What's he like? I heard myself ask. Virginia's expression softened slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her all afternoon. He looks exactly like you, she said. Same eyes, same stubborn jaw. Same temper that gets him into trouble because he can't let injustice stand. Something inside my chest cracked open. You've seen him? Twice. Years ago, when I was ensuring Claire's silence hadn't wavered. He was playing basketball in a park near their apartment, maybe 8 years old. He got fouled during a game, nothing serious, just aggressive play. But instead of shrugging it off, he stood his ground, demanded the older boys play fair. She paused, and for the first time, her composure wavered. He reminded me of you at that age, certain that the world should bend toward justice if you argued forcefully enough. I couldn't speak. Couldn't process the image of a boy, my boy, growing up without me, while I raised his brother 3 neighborhoods away. I need you to understand something, James. Virginia's voice had gone soft, almost pleading. What I did wasn't cruelty. It was calculation. I looked at 2 babies and made a choice about which one would thrive in the life you could provide. I chose the path that gave everyone the best possible outcome. You chose wrong, I said flatly. Perhaps. She stood, smoothing her dress with practiced precision. But what's done is done. The question now is what you do with the information. Do you dismantle 17 years of your son's identity to satisfy your need for biological accuracy? Do you force yourself into another child's life who has no context for your existence? That's not your decision to make. No, Virginia agreed. It's yours. But make it carefully, James, because truth isn't always healing. Sometimes it's just destruction with better press. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the brass handle. I love you, she said without turning around. Everything I've ever done, every choice, every intervention has been because I love you. Whether you believe that or not is up to you. She left, and I sat alone in that library, surrounded by unread books and the ruins of everything I'd believed about my family. The paper in my hand felt heavier than it should. An address. A name. A son. My mother didn't steal my child. She redesigned my entire life. And I'd spent 17 years living in the architecture of her lies, without ever knowing the foundation was rotten. There's a particular kind of betrayal that doesn't announce itself with violence. It signs permission slips and makes emergency contacts and shows up to school events while quietly erasing entire branches of your family tree. If you've ever discovered that the person you trusted most was the architect of your pain, you already know this story isn't fiction. It's a mirror. Share this with someone who understands that the deepest cuts come from the people who claim they're protecting us. And if you're not already subscribed, now's the time, because what comes next will show you what happens when a man finally stops trusting his mother and starts trusting the truth. I don't remember leaving the country club. One moment I was sitting in that leather chair, staring at an address written in my mother's perfect cursive. The next, I was in my car in the parking lot, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles ache. The paper sat on my passenger seat like evidence at a crime scene. I didn't remember walking out, didn't remember nodding at members who probably said hello, didn't remember retrieving my keys from the valet. Entire minutes had simply vanished, edited out by a brain that couldn't process what it had just learned. This is what trauma looks like in real time. Not screaming, not tears, just blank spaces where memory should be, because your mind is protecting you from feeling everything at once. I drove. Not toward home, not toward my office. Just drove through streets I'd known my entire life that suddenly felt like foreign territory. Every landmark I passed seemed different, now recontextualized by the knowledge that 17 years ago, while I was negotiating my first acquisition, 3 miles from Mercy General Hospital, my children were being born. While I was celebrating a deal closure at a restaurant I could see from this intersection, my mother was separating twins. While I was building an empire, my son was learning to walk in an apartment I'd never visited, speaking first words I'd never heard, celebrating birthdays I'd never attended. The timeline was dizzying. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot, arbitrary, random, and put the car in park because my hands were shaking too hard to keep driving safely. The silence inside the vehicle felt enormous. I sat there watching people push shopping carts, load bags into trunks, navigate the ordinary choreography of Thursday afternoon errands. Their lives made sense. Their identities were solid. They knew who they were, who their children were, what their families looked like. I didn't know anything anymore. If my life was built on a lie, what part of me was real? The question looped through my mind like code stuck in recursion. Every memory I'd cherished suddenly felt contaminated. Every milestone I'd celebrated with Andrew had a ghost twin, Marcus, experiencing the same moments alone. Every award ceremony, every Little League game, every steak dinner where Andrew thanked me for choosing him. Marcus never got chosen at all. Here's what nobody tells you about having your identity shattered. You can't just glue the pieces back together and pretend nothing happened. Every memory you trusted becomes evidence you were fooled. Every moment of pride becomes proof you didn't know your own life. Guilt rose in my throat like nausea. Not guilt over something I'd done. Guilt over something I'd failed to do for 17 years while living in ignorance my mother had manufactured. I'd loved the wrong child. No, that isn't right. I'd loved the child I'd been given, which wasn't wrong, but I'd failed to love, failed to even know the child I'd lost. And that failure felt unforgivable, even though I hadn't known there was anyone to fail. My phone buzzed. A text from the son I'd raised. Coach moved practice to Saturday. Can you still make it? I stared at the message. This boy, this 17-year-old who called me dad, who asked if I could make his practices, who'd thanked me for prioritizing him, had done nothing wrong. He was innocent. He'd been loved and raised and given every advantage, completely unaware that his entire existence was built on his grandmother's crime. Did he deserve to know? Did he deserve to have his identity shattered the way mine had been? And what about my other son, the one who'd grown up without me? Did he deserve to have a stranger show up, claiming paternity, disrupting whatever stability Claire had managed to build from the wreckage Virginia left behind? I didn't have answers. I only had questions that multiplied every time I tried to think clearly. I texted back, "I'll be there." Because whatever else was true, I was still his father in every way that mattered. Biology might be data, as Virginia had said, but love was real. Even if that love had been built on foundations I hadn't known were false. And here's the truth that's going to follow me for the rest of my life. You can love someone completely and still be part of a system that hurts someone else. Both things can be true. That's the cruelty of it. The sun was setting when I finally drove home. My penthouse felt like a museum of someone else's life. Photos on the mantle showing me and my son at various ages, first day of kindergarten, middle school graduation, last year's ski trip to Colorado. We looked happy in every image. We looked like father and son. But now I couldn't look at them without wondering about the matching photos that didn't exist. The parallel life where another boy grew up without documentation of a father's presence. I opened my laptop, typed the name Virginia had written on that paper into a search engine. Dozens of results appeared: social media profiles, school athletic rosters, honor roll announcements from a high school 40 minutes away. I clicked on images, and there he was, my son, the one I'd never met, 17 years old, in his most recent photo, wearing a basketball jersey, mid-jump shot, face caught in an expression of fierce concentration. Virginia was right. He looked exactly like me. Same steel gray eyes, same sharp jawline, same intensity that made him look older than 17. But there were differences too. His hair was longer, wilder, like he cut it himself or didn't care enough to visit a barber regularly. His frame was leaner, harder, like he'd grown up with less, and it had carved away anything soft. His smile in the few photos where he smiled wasn't polished. It was genuine, unguarded, the smile of someone who hadn't learned to perform for cameras. I scrolled through academic records I had no right to access, but found anyway through public school databases. Honor roll every semester. Advanced placement courses. A disciplinary note from sophomore year. Altercation with senior student. Witness reports indicate name redacted, was defending a younger student from bullying. Suspension reduced to detention given circumstances. I read that line 3 times. Defending a younger student from bullying. The same sense of justice Virginia had described when she'd watched him play basketball at 8 years old. The same instinct I'd raised my other son to have, standing up for what's right even when it's inconvenient. They shared that. These brothers who'd never met shared my temper, my principles, my refusal to let injustice stand unchallenged. And they developed those traits separately, 17 years apart, proving that some things were genetic regardless of environment. What you're witnessing right now is a father falling in love with a child he's never met, through pixels and public records and fragments of a life he should have been part of. This is grief and hope tangled together until you can't tell them apart. I found Claire's name in property records. An apartment in a complex, with peeling paint visible in Google Street View images. Not a slum, but not close to the neighborhoods where I'd raised her other son. Virginia's anonymous financial support apparently had limits. I clicked through more records, utility bills filed under her name, employment history showing her working as a medical transcriptionist for the past decade, a LinkedIn profile with a professional photo that made my chest tighten. She looked older than she should. Not just 18 years older, worn older, tired older. The kind of aging that comes from raising a child alone while the father builds empires and never knows to come looking. Had she hated me? Did she still? Virginia said she'd tried to contact me multiple times before giving up. How many calls had been intercepted? How many letters destroyed? At what point had she decided I simply didn't care rather than realizing I'd never known? And what had she told our son about me? That I'd abandoned them? That I'd chosen my career over fatherhood? That I was the kind of man who walked away when things got complicated? All of those things would be true from her perspective. She had no way of knowing I'd been deliberately kept in the darkness. I pulled up a map showing both addresses: the apartment where Claire and my son lived, the house where I'd raised his brother. 4.3 miles apart. Less than 10 minutes by car. For 17 years, my children had lived 4.3 miles from each other, attending schools in the same district, shopping at the same stores, possibly, existing in overlapping circles that never quite touched. Had they ever passed each other on the street? Stood in the same checkout line at a grocery store? Sat in the same movie theater, watching different films? The probability seemed impossible and inevitable simultaneously. Remember this detail: 4.3 miles. That's the distance between the life I knew and the life I should have had. Less than 10 minutes of driving, 17 years of separation. I closed the laptop because I couldn't look anymore. Couldn't stare at photos of a son who had my face, but not my name. Couldn't read about a life I should have been part of but had been edited out of before I knew it existed. The whiskey bottle I'd opened weeks ago still sat on my bar cart. I poured 3 fingers this time. Drank it standing at the window overlooking a city that used to make sense. Somewhere out there, 4.3 miles away, my son was doing homework or eating dinner or playing video games, completely unaware that his biological father had finally learned he existed. And 3 miles in a different direction, my other son was probably doing similar things, equally unaware that his entire family structure was a carefully constructed fiction. I'd spent 17 years being certain I was a good father, being proud of showing up, of prioritizing, of choosing my child over profits. But I'd only shown up for half my children. I'd only prioritized the son who'd been given to me. I'd only chosen the child I'd been allowed to know. And the worst part, the part that made the whiskey burn going down, was that I couldn't regret loving the boy I'd raised. Couldn't wish away 17 years of bedtime stories and soccer practices and homework help. Couldn't erase the pride I felt watching him grow into someone good despite the manipulation that had brought him into my life. That love was real. But so was the absence of love I should have had for his brother. Both truths existed simultaneously, and I didn't know how to hold them without breaking. I set down the empty glass and looked at my reflection in the darkened window. Same face I'd had this morning. Same expensive suit. Same penthouse. Same billion-dollar empire. But the man staring back at me was a stranger. Because if everything I'd believed about my family was fiction, then who was I really? A father who'd been manipulated into partial parenthood? A son who'd trusted a mother capable of separating twins? A man who'd built an empire on principles of integrity while living inside a lie? I didn't know. And for the first time in my adult life, I couldn't logic my way to an answer. The address Virginia had given me sat on my desk where I'd left it. Tomorrow, I would decide what to do with it. Tomorrow, I would figure out how to approach a son who didn't know I existed. Tomorrow, I would determine how to tell the son I'd raised that his entire identity had been built on his grandmother's crime. But tonight, I would stand here in this penthouse 43 floors above the wreckage of everything I'd believed, and I would let myself feel the full weight of what I'd lost. Not just years, not just memories, but the fundamental certainty that I knew who I was. Because that person, the competent CEO, the proud father, the son who'd trusted his mother had never been real. He'd been a character in a story Virginia had written, and I'd spent 17 years playing the role without ever reading the script. Now I had to figure out who I was when the script was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my desk until 3 in the morning, searching for fragments of a life I should have known about. The address Virginia gave me led to an apartment complex called Riverside Terrace, a name that promised more than the peeling paint and cracked parking lot delivered. Street view images showed a building that had been decent once, maybe 20 years ago, before deferred maintenance and absentee landlords let it slide into the category of affordable housing. My son lived on the 3rd floor, Unit 3C. I found his school schedule through the district's public athletics portal: basketball practice Mondays and Thursdays after school, games on Fridays. His team record showed more losses than wins, but his individual stats were impressive. Highest points per game, most assists, a defensive record that suggested he played like he had something to prove. I found a local news article from 2 years ago about a community youth center that had almost closed due to funding cuts. The photo accompanying the story showed a group of teenagers who'd organized a fundraiser. He was in the back row, arms crossed, not smiling for the camera while everyone around him performed enthusiasm. Even in that grainy newspaper photo, I could see myself. The way he stood slightly apart from the group, despite being part of it, the expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else, but had shown up anyway because it mattered. This is what it looks like to meet your child through research instead of memory. Through data points instead of birthday candles. Through pixels instead of presence. And the worst part? Every fact I learn just emphasizes how much I've missed. By dawn, I'd compiled enough information to write a biography of someone I'd never met. And none of it told me how to approach him. What did you say to a son who didn't know you existed? Hello, I'm your father. Sorry I missed the first 17 years my mother separated you from your twin brother at birth, and I only found out last week. There was no greeting card category for that conversation. I showered, dressed in jeans and a sweater instead of my usual suit, some instinct suggesting that showing up as Billionaire CEO James Birch would be exactly the wrong approach. Then I drove to Riverside Terrace. It looked worse in person than it had on Google Maps. The parking lot had potholes deep enough to damage suspension systems. The exterior paint was the kind of beige that had given up pretending to be attractive. A group of younger kids played basketball on a court with a crooked rim and faded boundary lines. I parked across the street and waited. For what? I didn't know. Clarity, maybe. Courage. Some sign that this was the right decision rather than the most selfish thing I could do, forcing myself into a life that had survived 17 years without me. At 3:45, the school bus stopped at the corner. A handful of teenagers got off, dispersing toward various buildings with the practiced efficiency of people navigating familiar territory. And then I saw him, my son, walking with his backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in, head down against the November wind that had picked up since morning. He was taller than I'd expected from the photos, at least 6 feet, with the rangy build of someone who'd hit a growth spurt recently and hadn't quite grown into his new proportions yet. He wore a jacket that had seen better days, jeans with a tear at one knee that might have been fashion or might have been wear, sneakers that were practical rather than expensive. Everything about him screamed different from the son I'd raised, the one who wore designer clothes without thinking about it, who'd never taken a school bus because I'd arranged private transportation, who'd never lived anywhere that required navigating potholes to reach his front door. But his face was mine. Same jawline, same intensity in his expression even when he was just walking home from school. Same way of moving that suggested he was ready for a fight even when no fight was coming. I sat in my car watching him cross the parking lot, and something in my chest cracked open. This was my child. My son who I'd never protected, never coached, never helped with homework, or driven to practices, or celebrated birthdays with. My son who'd grown up 4.3 miles from his brother while I'd poured everything into raising only one of them. He disappeared into the building. I should have left. Should have gone home and figured out a better approach than stalking him from my car like some kind of criminal. But I couldn't make myself drive away. This moment right here, this is what happens when love and shame collide. When you want so desperately to know someone that you're willing to sit in a parking lot like a stranger watching their life from the outside. This is fatherhood arriving 17 years late. At 4:30, he emerged again. Changed clothes, basketball shorts now, a hoodie with his school logo, the same worn sneakers. He had a basketball under one arm. I watched him walk to the court where the younger kids had been playing earlier. They'd left, and now the cracked concrete was empty, except for fallen leaves collecting in the corners. He started shooting. Methodical, focused. The way someone practices when they've taught themselves through repetition rather than professional coaching. The rain started around 5 o'clock. Not heavy, just the cold November drizzle that makes everything miserable. The smart thing would have been to go inside. He kept playing. I found myself getting out of my car. Found myself crossing the street, standing at the edge of the court in the rain, watching this boy who carried my genetics but none of my privilege shoot baskets like the weather didn't exist. He noticed me after his 5th shot, caught the rebound, turned, and froze when he saw me standing there. "Court's open," he said after a moment, guarded. "I'm not stopping anyone from playing." His voice was deeper than I'd expected, rougher around the edges, like he'd learned to speak with authority because nobody else would provide it for him. "I'm not here to play," I said. He studied me with an expression I recognized, the same assessment I made when meeting people for the first time, cataloging threat level and intention in seconds. "You a cop?" he asked. "No." "Social worker?" "No." "Then why are you standing in the rain watching me play basketball?" "Because that's creepy, man." "Fair point." I should have had an answer prepared. Should have scripted this moment during the sleepless hours I'd spent researching his life. Instead, I said, "You're good. How long have you been playing?" Suspicion flickered across his face, but pride won out. "Since I was 8, taught myself mostly, YouTube videos and stuff." 8 years old. The same age Virginia said she'd watched him playing in this same park, demanding older boys play fair. "You ever think about playing in college?" I asked. He shrugged. But something in his expression shifted, a glimpse of hope quickly buried. "Can't afford the camps and showcases that get you recruited. So, probably not." The casual acceptance in his voice, the way he'd already resigned himself to limitations based on money made rage burn through my chest. This was my son. My son, who should have had every opportunity, every advantage, every door opened the way I'd opened them for his brother. Instead, he was teaching himself basketball from YouTube videos, and accepting that college recruitment was for kids who could afford to be seen. Listen to what he just said. "Can't afford the camps. This is my son, my flesh and blood, limiting his dreams because of money I have in abundance. This is what Virginia's better future looks like. Someone should help you with that," I said. "Yeah, well." He caught the ball, held it against his hip. "That's not how my life works. You done being weird, or should I call someone?" The rain was coming down harder now, soaking through my sweater, plastering his hair to his forehead. And I looked at him, really looked at him, this 17-year-old who'd inherited my face and my fire but none of my protection. "You look like me," I said before I could stop myself. He blinked. "What?" "You look like me," I repeated. "Has anyone ever told you that?" He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Maybe I had." "I don't know you," he said slowly. "So no. Nobody's mentioned I look like a random dude who watches teenagers play basketball in the rain." Fair. All of that was fair. I should have left then. Should have walked away and figured out a sane approach that didn't involve standing in November rain, making cryptic statements to a son who had no context for my existence. But I couldn't move. "What's your name?" I asked instead. His guard went back up immediately. "Why?" "Just curious." That's not an answer. "God," he even argued like me. "I'm James," I said, offering the smallest truth I could give. He didn't offer his name in return, just stood there in the rain, holding his basketball, looking at me like I was a problem he was trying to solve. "You should go home," he said finally. "This is weird, and I don't do weird." "Okay," I said, but I didn't move. And neither did he. We stood there for another 30 seconds, father and son, neither of us knowing what we were to each other, while rain soaked us both, and the distance between us felt infinite and impossible to cross. "Seriously, man," he said, quieter now. "You need to leave. My mom gets home at 6, and if she sees some stranger talking to me, she'll call the cops first and ask questions never." Claire. His mother, who'd raised him alone, while I'd raised his brother, in ignorance. "I'll go," I said. And this time I did. Walked back to my car while he stood there watching me with an expression I couldn't read. I sat behind the wheel with rain streaming down the windshield and looked back at the court. He'd gone back to shooting baskets. Like our conversation had never happened. Like I was already forgotten. But I would never forget this moment. The first time I'd seen my son in person. The first time I'd heard his voice. The first time I'd stood close enough to touch him and had to force myself not to. He carried my face, but none of my protection. He carried my determination, but none of my resources. He carried 17 years of absence that I hadn't known existed until a week ago. And sitting there in my car, watching him play basketball alone in the rain, I felt something I'd never felt before as a father. Not pride. Not satisfaction. Just grief. Pure, undiluted grief for every moment I'd missed, every game I hadn't attended, every birthday that had passed without me, every time he'd needed a father and had only his mother because mine had decided he wasn't worth my knowing. I drove home through rain that matched the tears I refused to acknowledge. And I knew that tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever I found the courage, I would have to go back. Would have to find the words to explain the inexplicable. Would have to look this boy in the eyes and tell him that his entire life had been shaped by his grandmother's crime. But tonight, I would let him keep playing basketball in the rain. Keep living a life that made sense, even if that sense was built on my absence. Because once I told him the truth, nothing would make sense ever again. For either of us. Grief for someone who's still alive hits different than any other loss. You're mourning years that existed but you weren't in them. Mourning birthdays you should have celebrated, games you should have attended, conversations you should have had. If you've ever had to reckon with time you can't get back with relationships that should have been but weren't, you understand what I'm talking about. Leave a comment if this story is bringing up memories you thought you'd buried. And hit that like button if you believe some losses don't get fixed, they just get faced. Because we're only halfway through this story, and the hardest conversations are still coming. It took me 3 days to decide how to do it. 3 days of sleepless nights, abandoned plans, conversations rehearsed and discarded, because there was no script for detonating 2 lives simultaneously. I couldn't tell them separately. That felt like choosing one truth over another, prioritizing one son's right to know over his brother's. I couldn't tell them with their mother's present. Claire would have every right to throw me out, and my ex-wife would weaponize the information in ways that served her narrative, not our son's well-being. So I did something that felt equally terrible and necessary. I invited the son I'd raised to dinner at my penthouse on Saturday at 6. And I asked the son I'd just met to come at 6:30. What you're about to witness is a collision, 17 years in the making. 2 brothers who should have shared a crib are about to meet as strangers. And I'm the one forcing it to happen. Remember this moment because there's no going back after this. The meeting at the basketball court had been brief. I'd gone back the next day, introduced myself properly without the cryptic comments, and asked if he'd be willing to talk. About what? I didn't specify. He'd been suspicious, guarded, but something in my face must have convinced him I wasn't a threat. Or maybe he was just curious why a stranger kept showing up. Either way, he'd agreed. I didn't tell him about his brother. I didn't tell his brother about him. I was about to force 2 17-year-olds into the same room and shatter every certainty they'd built their identities on. The apartment felt like a stage set, waiting for a tragedy. I'd sent my housekeeper home early, ordered dinner I knew neither of them would eat, set 3 places at my dining table like this was a normal meal, instead of an ambush. My son, the one I'd raised, arrived at 5:57, early, like I'd taught him. "Hey, Dad." He dropped his backpack by the door, the casual gesture of someone who'd spent countless evenings in this space. "What's the occasion?" "You sounded weird on the phone." "I need to talk to you about something," I said. "But I need you to wait about 30 minutes. Someone else is coming." His expression shifted immediately. "Is this about college stuff? Because if you hired another consultant..." "It's not about college." "Then what?" "Please." I gestured to the living room. "Just trust me." 30 minutes. He studied my face with the perception kids develop when they've spent their whole lives reading their parents' moods for survival. "You're scaring me," he said quietly. "I know, I'm sorry." The doorbell rang at 6:28. 2 minutes early, also punctual, but arriving as a visitor rather than someone with a key. My raised son looked at me, confused. "Who is that?" I didn't answer, just walked to the door and opened it. My biological son stood in the hallway wearing the same worn jacket from the basketball court, hands shoved in his pockets, expression guarded. "Still think this is weird," he said. "I know." I stepped aside to let him in. He walked into my penthouse, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the expensive furniture, the life I'd lived while he'd grown up in apartment 3C at Riverside Terrace. And then his eyes landed on my other son. The confusion on both their faces was identical. "Dad?" My raised son stood up slowly. "What's going on?" "You have a dad?" My biological son said at the same moment, his voice sharp with something that sounded like betrayal. They stared at each other. And I watched them realize what I'd seen immediately, that they were looking at a mirror. Same steel gray eyes, same jawline, same height and build, though one was polished and the other was rougher around the edges. "What the hell?" My biological son took a step back. "Why do you look like me?" "I could ask you the same thing," my raised son said, and his voice had gone thin with rising panic. "Dad, who is this?" Pay close attention to their faces right now. This is the moment when reality breaks. When two boys who've lived separate lives for 17 years suddenly see proof that everything they believed about themselves was incomplete. Before I could answer, I heard the elevator in the hallway. My private elevator, which required a key I'd only given to 3 people. Myself, my housekeeper, and Virginia. The doors opened. My mother stepped out, wearing a Chanel suit and her pearls, her face carefully composed in the expression she wore when managing situations she deemed unacceptable. "James." She saw the 3 of us standing in my entryway. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done 17 years ago," I said. She walked into my penthouse without invitation, and for the first time in my life, I wanted to physically remove her. "You brought him here?" Virginia's gaze swept over my biological son, with the same assessing look she'd probably used in the hospital 17 years ago, deciding which twin was worthy of the Birch name. "This is incredibly ill-advised. You don't get a vote," I said quietly. "I'm your mother. You lost that right when you separated my children." My raised son made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "Separated," he repeated. "What does that mean?" Virginia's jaw tightened. "James, don't do this. Not like this. These boys deserve better than." "These boys deserve the truth from the beginning," I interrupted. "They deserve to grow up together. They deserve to know each other. And you took that from them. Someone want to explain what's happening?" My biological son's voice had gone dangerous. "Because I'm about 5 seconds from walking out." "Don't." I turned to face them both. "Please, both of you. I know I'm handling this terribly, but I need you to hear something. And I need you to hear it together." "Hear what?" my raised son asked. I looked at these 2 boys who'd inherited my face and my intensity, who'd grown up 4.3 miles apart without knowing the other existed, who were about to learn that their entire lives had been architected by the woman standing in my living room wearing pearls. "Your brothers," I said. "Twins. Born 3 minutes apart, 17 years ago, at Mercy General Hospital." The silence that followed felt like a physical presence. "That's impossible," my raised son whispered. "It's true." I forced myself to continue. "Your grandmother," I gestured toward Virginia, "separated you at birth. She gave one of you to me to raise. She left the other with your biological mother. And she made certain I never knew either of you existed, until a doctor asked me a question 3 weeks ago that I couldn't answer." My biological son's expression had gone carefully blank. Yes. And he gestured at his brother. What? My twin? Yes. That's insane. But his voice shook. That's actually insane. And here's where everything you thought you knew about family gets rewritten. Because they're not just learning about each other, they're learning that someone deliberately kept them apart. That's not accident, that's architecture. My raised son was staring at Virginia. Grandmother? Is this true? She lifted her chin slightly. I did what was necessary for this family. You separated twins? His voice cracked. How is that necessary? Your biological mother was unstable, Virginia said calmly, as if she were explaining a business decision. She couldn't care for two children. I ensured you both had the best possible outcomes, given the circumstances. Best possible outcomes. My biological son's laugh was bitter. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment, where my mom worked 2 jobs to keep us fed. He gestured at his brother. Grew up here. You think those are equal outcomes? I ensured your mother received financial support, Virginia said. Anonymous checks that barely covered rent. My biological son shot back. Yeah, super generous. Stop. I stepped between them and Virginia. This isn't about defending your choices, mother. This is about telling them the truth. The truth is complicated, James. The truth is simple, I said. You played God with their lives. You decided one of them deserved privileges and the other deserved absence. You chose wrong, not because you picked the wrong twin, but because you chose at all. Virginia's composure finally cracked. I was protecting you. You were 25, building your career, completely unprepared for fatherhood. That wasn't your decision to make. The words came out louder than I'd intended. You took my choice away. You took their choice away. You stole 17 years that these boys should have had together. My raised son was crying now, quiet tears streaming down his face. Did you know? He asked me. When you were raising me, did you know I had a brother? No. The word felt inadequate. I swear to you, I didn't know. Not until 3 weeks ago. But you know now. My biological son's voice was flat. You've known for 3 weeks, and you're just now telling us? I didn't know how. I stopped. Started again. There's no good way to do this. I've been trying to find the right approach, the right words, the right timing, and none of it exists. So yes, I'm doing this badly. But I'm doing it because you both deserve to know the truth. They looked at each other again. 2 17-year-olds, who should have grown up finishing each other's sentences, who should have shared bedrooms and inside jokes, and the particular bond that twins have. Instead, they were strangers. I don't know what you want me to say, my biological son said finally. Hi, brother. Nice to meet you after 17 years of you living in a penthouse while I lived in poverty. That's not his fault, I said. No, it's yours. And hers. He glared at Virginia. But mostly, it's hers. I won't apologize for giving you both life, Virginia said. We already had life, my raised son shouted, and the sound was so raw it made me flinch. You didn't give us life. You rearranged it. You decided my brother wasn't good enough to be part of this family, and you just threw him away. That's not what I did. That's exactly what you did, I said quietly. You looked at 2 babies and decided one was worth keeping and one wasn't. You dressed it up as protection and family legacy and proper future. But what you did was separate twins and steal 17 years they should have had together. Virginia's hands were shaking. James, please. No. For the first time in my life, I said no to Virginia Birch without hesitation. You don't get to manage this. You don't get to spin this into something noble. You committed fraud, you falsified documents, and you destroyed lives because you thought you knew better than everyone else what the right future looked like. I gave them both futures, she whispered. You gave them half-lives, I said. And now they have to figure out how to build whole ones from the wreckage. This is the moment when control dies. When the person who orchestrated everything loses her grip. When the boys she separated finally stand in the same room and see what was stolen from them. My raised son was staring at his brother. What's your name? He asked quietly. My biological son hesitated. Then, Marcus. Marcus, my raised son repeated. His voice broke. I don't even know what to call myself. Everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. Yeah, Marcus said. Welcome to my whole life. They stood there looking at each other across my living room. Two boys who shared genetics and abandonment, and a grandmother who'd thought she had the right to redesign their existence. And I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. There was no right child. There was no better twin, no worse outcome, no version of this where Virginia's choices could be justified. There were only two boys who'd both been stolen, one from his mother, one from his father, both from each other. And now they were standing in the wreckage, trying to figure out what came next. My raised son's voice cracked. Can I talk to him? Alone? I looked at Marcus, who nodded slowly. Use my office, I said. They walked away together, two strangers, connected by blood and betrayal, and closed the door behind them, leaving me alone with Virginia. You've destroyed this family, she said quietly. No, I said. You did that 17 years ago. I'm just finally telling the truth about it. She left without another word. And I stood in my living room listening to muffled voices from my office, my sons, talking for the first time in their lives, trying to build something from the ruins of what should have always been theirs. Brothers. Finally. 17 years too late. They were in my office for 47 minutes. I didn't listen at the door. They deserved privacy for a conversation I couldn't be part of. Instead, I stood at my window and waited, the same way I'd waited for DNA results that never came, for truth that had been stolen, for answers that only created more questions. When the door finally opened, my raised son emerged first. His eyes were red. His face was blotchy. But something in his expression had shifted, like he'd been carrying weight he didn't know existed and had finally set it down. I'm going home, he said. To Mom's. I need to process this. Okay, I said. Marcus is staying. He wants to talk to you. All right. My raised son paused at the door. Dad, I don't know what happens next. With us, I mean. But I need time. Take all the time you need. He left. And Marcus emerged from my office, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. You want me to go too? He asked. Do you want to go? Asked you first. Even now, even in this moment, he was guarded, protecting himself because he'd learned early that nobody else would. I want you to stay, I said, but only if you want to. Marcus studied me for a long moment. Then he walked to my window, stood where I'd been standing, looked out at the city lights the same way I had. Your other son, he said. What's his name? Andrew. Andrew. Marcus tested the name. He seems nice. Messed up right now, but nice. He is. Lucky him, getting you as a dad. The words landed like accusations, even though his tone was neutral. Marcus, I need to ask you something, he interrupted, still facing the window. And I need you to answer honestly. Not the answer you think I want. The truth. Okay. He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my chest tighten, not anger, but something more vulnerable, something that looked like a wound, asking permission to heal. If you'd known, he said slowly, about me and Andrew. If your mother hadn't interfered. If you'd known there were twins, and you had to choose. He stopped, took a breath. Would you have chosen me? This is the question that destroys fathers. Not because the answer is hard, but because the honest answer doesn't heal anything. It just shows the wound more clearly. The question hung between us. The same question I'd been asking myself for days, trying to find an answer that would comfort him, that would make 17 years of absence somehow justified, or at least explainable. But there was no comfortable answer. Only truth. That's not fair, I said quietly. Life's not fair, Marcus said. Answer the question. I wanted to say yes. Wanted to give him the comfort of knowing he would have been chosen, would have been wanted, would have grown up in this penthouse with his brother, if only I'd known. But that would have been a lie. And after 17 years of living in someone else's lie, he deserved better. I don't know, I said finally. Marcus flinched like I'd hit him. I was 25 when you were born, I continued, forcing myself not to look away from the pain in his eyes. Building my first company, working 100-hour weeks, completely unprepared for fatherhood. If Virginia had told me your mother was pregnant with twins, if she'd given me that choice, I honestly don't know what I would have done. So maybe she was right, Marcus said bitterly. Maybe I would have been better off without you. No, I took a step toward him, because the choice wasn't hers to make. Maybe I would have chosen wrong. Maybe I would have panicked and run. Maybe I would have been a terrible father to both of you. But that should have been my mistake to make, not hers. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You would have chosen him, he said finally, if you'd had to pick one of us. You would have chosen Andrew. Why do you think that? Because apparently your mother did, and you trust her judgment about everything else, so why not that? I don't trust her judgment anymore, I said. Not about this, not about anything. But you did. For 17 years, you did. He was right. For 17 years, I'd trusted Virginia's guidance, her decisions, her version of what the Birch family should look like. And that trust had cost Marcus everything. Here's what nobody tells you about trying to love someone you've failed. Honesty doesn't make it better. But it's the only foundation that might eventually hold weight. I can't rewrite history, I said. I can't go back and choose you from the beginning. I can't give you 17 years of birthday parties and soccer games and bedtime stories. Those moments are gone, and I hate that they're gone, but I can't resurrect them. Then what can you do? I can show up now, I said. I can try to be present for whatever comes next. I can acknowledge that I failed you, even if I didn't know I was failing, and I can try to do better. That's not enough. I know. I mean it. Marcus's voice shook. Showing up now doesn't fix 17 years of being absent. It doesn't erase the times I needed a father and only had my mom working double shifts. It doesn't make us even with Andrew. You're right, I said. It doesn't make anything even. And I'm not asking for forgiveness or gratitude or even acceptance. I'm just offering to try. Why? Because you're my son. So is Andrew. And you didn't seem to need proof of biology to love him. The observation cut deeper than he probably intended. He was right, I'd loved Andrew without ever questioning our biological connection. Love had simply existed, built through years of presence and care and shared moments. But with Marcus, I was asking him to believe in a love that had no foundation. A love that arrived 17 years late and expected to matter anyway. Love that arrives late, still has weight, I said quietly. But it doesn't have innocence. I can't love you the way I love Andrew, not yet, maybe not ever in the same way. Because that love was built over time. Built through showing up and failing and trying again. What I'm offering you isn't the same thing. It's just the beginning of something that might become love if you give it time. Marcus wiped at his eyes roughly. I don't know if I can do that. I know. I don't know if I want to. I know that too. You ruined my life tonight, he said. You know that, right? Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family, about why things were the way they were, all of it's gone now. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. He stood again, restless, unable to sit still with the weight of everything he'd learned. Apologizing doesn't help. It just makes you feel better while I'm still standing here with my entire identity shattered. You're right. Stop agreeing with me too. What do you want me to do? I asked, and this time I let the helplessness show in my voice. Tell me what you need, and I'll try to give it to you. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. And this is the moment that breaks every father who's ever shown up late. When your child tells you exactly what they needed, and you realize you can't go back and provide it. I need you to have been there, he said finally. I need you to have been at my 8th birthday, when nobody showed up except my mom and her coworker. I need you to have taught me to play basketball instead of YouTube. I need you to have been in the stands at my games. I need 17 years of you giving a damn about whether I existed. I can't give you that. I know, his voice broke. That's the problem. We stood there in my expensive penthouse, father and son separated by 17 years of absence, that couldn't be bridged with apologies or good intentions. If I'd known, I said finally, answering the question he'd asked earlier, I would have chosen both of you, not one or the other, both. And I would have failed at it because I wasn't ready, but I would have tried. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah. Well, we'll never know if that's true. No, I agreed. We won't. He walked to the door again. This time, I didn't ask him to stay. Marcus, I said as his hand touched the doorknob. He looked back. Andrew's going through this too, I said. His whole identity just got shattered. If you need someone who understands, he's your brother. The only person in the world who's experiencing exactly what you are. Something flickered across Marcus's face recognition, maybe. That he wasn't alone in this anymore. Yeah, he said quietly. Maybe. He left. And I stood alone in my penthouse, surrounded by the wreckage of 2 lives I'd helped destroy by simply not knowing they existed. Love that arrives late still has weight, but it doesn't have innocence, and it doesn't erase the damage done by its absence. It just offers to carry whatever comes next. And sometimes, maybe that's enough to start with. I called Claire the next morning, found her number through the same property records I'd used to find Marcus, and dialed before I could convince myself there was a better time, a better approach, a better version of this conversation that didn't start with 17 years of apology. She answered on the 3rd ring. Hello? Her voice was exactly as I remembered, softer than I'd expected after all these years, carrying the kind of careful neutrality people develop when they've learned not to trust phone calls from unknown numbers. Claire, it's James Birch. Silence. Then, how did you get this number? I'm sorry. I know I have no right to call, but I need you to know that I didn't know. About Marcus. About the pregnancy. About any of it. More silence. Claire, you didn't know. Her voice had gone flat. For 17 years, you didn't know you had a son. My mother intercepted everything. The calls, the letters, the S. I know what your mother did, James. She made that very clear when she showed up at the hospital after I gave birth. The words hit like a fist. She told you I didn't want to be involved? She told me a lot of things. Claire's voice shook slightly. She told me you were building your career and couldn't be derailed by an unstable girlfriend with no prospects. She told me you'd signed away your parental rights, which I later discovered was a lie, but by then I'd moved 3 times trying to get away from her influence. She told me that if I tried to contact you again, she'd make certain Marcus and I had nothing. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back 17 years, James. Sorry doesn't erase the nights I worked double shifts while my son ate cereal for dinner. Sorry doesn't. She stopped. Took a breath. Why are you calling now? Because Marcus met his brother yesterday. I told them both the truth about what Virginia did, and I need you to know that I'm going to do everything I can to make this right. You can't make this right. I know. But I can show up now. I can try to be present for Marcus, if he'll let me. I can. He came home last night, Claire interrupted quietly, at 11 p.m., stood in my kitchen and told me everything. Then he went to his room, and I heard him crying through the walls for 2 hours. The image made my chest tighten. Claire, do you have any idea what it's like to watch your child break? Her voice was fierce now. To see him realize that his entire life was shaped by someone else's cruelty, that he had a father who could have helped, should have been there, but was kept away by his own mother? No, I said honestly. I can't imagine that. But I'm living with the mirror version, realizing I had a son I never protected. She was quiet for a moment. What do you want from me, James? Permission to try, I said. Permission to show up. Permission to be part of Marcus's life in whatever capacity he'll allow. That's not my permission to give. He's 17, old enough to decide for himself whether he wants a father who arrives 17 years late. But you're his mother. Your opinion matters. My opinion, Claire said slowly, is that you don't get to walk in now and play hero. You don't get to fix your guilt by throwing money at problems you didn't create. And you don't get to hurt him worse than he's already been hurt. I won't. Let me finish. Her voice cut through my attempt at reassurance. If you're going to do this, if you're really going to try to be his father, then you show up consistently. Not when it's convenient. Not when it makes you feel better about your absence. Every day, every game. Every moment he needs you, even when he says he doesn't. I will. Because if you disappoint him again, James, I will make certain you never get another chance. Am I clear? Yes. Good. Some of the fight went out of her voice. He looks like you know. Every day for 17 years. I've looked at my son and seen your face. Some days, that made me angry. Some days it made me sad. But every single day, it reminded me of what we could have been if your mother hadn't decided we weren't good enough. You were always good enough, I said. I'm sorry I never got to tell you that. Yeah, Claire said quietly. Me too. She hung up without saying goodbye. And I sat there holding my phone, adding her pain to the growing list of damage I needed to acknowledge but couldn't repair. Andrew came to see me 3 days later. I'd given him space, sent a single text, asking if he was okay, received a one-word response. Processing. and waited for him to decide when he was ready to talk. He showed up at my office at 2 in the afternoon, bypassing my assistant with the familiarity of someone who'd done it 100 times before. "Hey," he said, standing in my doorway like he wasn't sure he had permission to enter. "Hey." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Come in." He sat, and I noticed he looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his usual put-together appearance slightly disheveled. "I talked to Mom," he said, "about everything. About Marcus, about Grandmother. How did she take it? She's furious. At Grandmother, mostly. At you a little bit for not telling her sooner." He looked at me for being angry about it. "You're allowed to be angry." "Am I?" His voice cracked. "Because I've spent the last 3 days feeling like I don't have the right to be upset. Marcus is the one who got screwed over. I got everything. So what right do I have to be mad that my entire family was built on a lie?" "Every right," I said firmly. "Your identity was shattered too. The fact that you had privileges Marcus didn't have doesn't erase the damage done to you." Andrew wiped at his eyes. "I keep thinking about all the times I complained about my life. About how you worked too much, or Mom was too strict, or Grandmother was too involved. And the whole time, Marcus was living in an apartment that probably cost less than my monthly allowance, and I didn't even know he existed. That's not your fault. It feels like it should be somebody's fault besides Grandmother." "It is," I said. "It's mine. I'm the one who trusted her without question. I'm the one who never suspected something was wrong. I'm the one who raised you while your brother grew up thinking I'd abandoned him." Andrew looked at me for a long moment. "Do you love him?" The question caught me off guard. I barely know him. That's not what I asked. I thought about Marcus standing in my penthouse, asking if I would have chosen him. Thought about watching him play basketball in the rain. Thought about the grief that had hit me when I realized how much of his life I'd missed. I said honestly, I want to know him well enough to love him the way I love you. But I don't know if he'll let me. And I don't know if love that starts this late can ever be the same." "It can't be," Andrew said quietly. "You and I have 17 years. You and Marcus have." "What? A couple of conversations and a lot of trauma?" "Yes. So what happens now?" "I show up," I said. "For both of you. I tried to be the father you've always had, and the father Marcus never got. And I accept that it won't be equal, or fair, or enough." Andrew nodded slowly. "I want to know him. Marcus, my brother. He might not be ready for that. I know. But when he is, if he is, I want to try." Andrew's voice strengthened. "Grandmother stole 17 years from us. I'm not letting her steal anymore." Virginia's attorneys called 2 weeks later. She'd relocated to her vacation home in the Hamptons, effectively removing herself from proximity to the damage she'd caused. I didn't visit, didn't call, didn't engage with the messages she sent through intermediaries suggesting we discuss this privately. Instead, I hired a law firm to investigate exactly what laws she'd broken 17 years ago. The list was longer than expected: document falsification, fraud, potential kidnapping charges that had aged beyond statute of limitations but remained morally damning. My attorney asked if I wanted to press charges. I thought about Marcus's question. "If you'd known, would you have chosen me?" Thought about Andrew's exhaustion and Claire's protective fury. Thought about 17 years that couldn't be recovered no matter how many legal consequences Virginia faced. "No," I said finally, "but I want everything documented. Every law she broke, every document she falsified, every life she manipulated. I want it on record, so if she ever tries to justify what she did, there's proof of exactly what it cost." My attorney nodded. "And your relationship with her?" "Over," I said simply. "Whatever she was to me before, she's not that anymore." Marcus's first basketball game of the season happened on a Friday in early December. I almost didn't go, hadn't heard from him since he'd left my penthouse. Didn't know if my presence would be welcome or intrusive. But Claire's words echoed. "You show up consistently. Every game, every moment." So I went. Sat in the bleachers of a high school gymnasium that smelled like floor wax and teenage ambition, surrounded by parents I didn't know, cheering for kids who'd grown up together. Marcus didn't see me at first. He was focused, intense, playing with the same determination I'd watched him practice with in the rain. Then halftime came, and he glanced into the stands. Our eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just looked at me for 3 long seconds before turning back to his coach. But he'd seen me, and I'd shown up. That felt like something. Andrew came to the next game. Sat beside me without asking permission, watching his brother play with an expression I couldn't quite read, awe, maybe, or grief, for all the games they should have attended together. "He's good," Andrew said. "Yeah, he is. Better than me. Different sport, different training. Same genes though," Andrew said quietly. "Same instincts. Look at how he moves. He has that same intensity you have when you're negotiating deals. Like winning isn't optional." He was right. Marcus played basketball the way I built companies, with singular focus and refusal to accept failure. We'd given him that. Claire and I, separately, had somehow managed to raise a son who carried pieces of both of us, despite growing up in a one-bedroom apartment while I'd lived in ignorant luxury. After the game, they won by 3 points, Marcus scoring the final basket. I waited outside the locker room. Didn't know if he'd talk to me. Didn't know if I had any right to be there. But I showed up anyway. He emerged 20 minutes later, hair still damp from the shower, gym bag slung over his shoulder. Saw me standing there. Stopped. "You came," he said. "I did." "Why?" "Because you're my son," I said. "And I'm trying to figure out how to be your father." Marcus looked at me for a long moment. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. "Okay." One word. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, not love. Just acknowledgement that I'd shown up. And that, for now, was enough. Showing up isn't redemption. It's not forgiveness. It's not even healing, really. It's just the first step in a journey that might take years, or might never reach a destination at all. But it's the only step available when you've spent 17 years absent. If you've ever had to rebuild trust you broke, or if someone's trying to rebuild trust with you, you know this tension. The weight of showing up when you have no right to expect it matters. Hit that subscribe button if you believe some relationships don't get fixed, they just get rebuilt, one awkward moment at a time. Because this story doesn't end here. The real work is just beginning. I didn't raise the wrong child. That realization came slowly, over weeks of showing up at Marcus's games and having stilted conversations with Andrew about how to rebuild trust. I'd raised one child while failing to know another existed. Both truths could be simultaneously real. Some mistakes don't get fixed. They don't get resolved with apologies or legal consequences or even consistent presence. They just get faced. Every day. Every moment. Every time I look at my sons, both of them, and remember that their lives were shaped by someone else's cruelty and my own failure to question what I'd been told. Virginia was wrong about many things, but she was right about one. Love is what makes someone a father. Not biology, not genetics, not even presence from the beginning. Just the choice to keep showing up, even when it's 17 years too late, even when the damage can't be undone, even when the best you can offer is acknowledgement that you failed and willingness to try anyway. I have 2 sons. One I've loved for 17 years. One I'm learning to love now. Neither relationship is perfect. Neither will ever be simple. But they're both mine. 3 months after that first game, Marcus texted me. "Mom says you're paying for basketball camp. You don't have to do that." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I want to, if you'll let me." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Okay, thanks." 2 words, but they felt like progress. Andrew started inviting Marcus to things, movies, dinners, just hanging out. Marcus came to some, skipped others, always keeping one foot outside the door in case he needed to run. But slowly, so slowly, I almost didn't notice he stopped running quite so quickly. Claire and I had coffee once. Awkward, painful, full of 17 years of things we couldn't say, and apologies that didn't fix anything. But we both agreed on one thing. Our son mattered more than our history. And maybe that was enough to build on. You know what they don't tell you about family secrets? That the truth doesn't set you free, it just gives you new problems to solve. But those problems belong to you in a way the lies never did. If this story made you think about the truths you've been avoiding, the conversations you've been postponing, the relationships that deserve honesty, even when honesty hurts, leave a comment. Tell me what family truth you're carrying. And subscribe. Because stories like this, stories about real damage and imperfect repair, they matter more than fairy tales ever could. Share this with someone who needs to know that showing up late is better than never showing up at all. Because some mistakes don't end. They just demand you show up anyway. I stood at my window one evening, the same window where I'd stood the night I learned my life was built on lies, and watched the city lights blur against the glass. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Game Friday. You coming? I smiled. Wouldn't miss it. 3 dots. Then, Andrew's coming too. Says he wants to learn basketball. That'll be interesting. Yeah. Might be weird. Probably will be. But good, weird maybe? I looked at those words for a long time. Good, weird, maybe. That's what we were building. Not a perfect family, not a reconstructed version of what should have been. Just something new, something honest. Something that acknowledged the damage while refusing to let it be the final word. Yeah, I typed back. Good, weird, maybe. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough. Because some mistakes don't get forgiven. They only get faced. And facing them, showing up, trying, failing, trying again, that's not redemption. It's just responsibility. The kind that doesn't end when you want it to. The kind that demands you show up anyway. Every game. Every conversation. Every moment when the easy thing would be to walk away, and the right thing is to stay. I have 2 sons. And I'm learning to be a father to both of them. Not the father I should have been from the beginning. Just the father I'm capable of being now. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to start with.